Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is September 30, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Eugene Halton. That's Jumpin' Gene. Where are you calling in from, Gene?
South Bend, Indiana, the heart
Wow.
of Midwest Civ.
How cool is that? First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being is to be alive in the wonder of life.
Yeah. Wow. You know, Louis Buñuel said, "Long live the living."
that
But your word wonder
beats the king is dead, or I don't know, maybe that's a good thing
is
too.
that beats the what?
The king is dead, long live the king.
Oh, long live the king. The king said, yeah. But I love your word wonder. That was good. So, Gene, what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Well, I draw in visual and audio information. Putting favorite into that. Uh, One of my favorite forms of information coming in is when I'm on a walk, say in the woods, and I start to see things happening that connect. You know, when you see uh, an animal run and you see what's causing that, or the wind coming in and the leaves rustling, it feels, and it starts to get more senses involved as well. That would
Really,
be, I mean, I really enjoy that.
it's really a great answer because this is what's happening to us all the time, and we can just ignore them and go along, or we can have that sense of wonder and make the pattern, recognize the pattern, recognize the connection. I like that word connection. So
Yeah.
why do you think humans gather or collect information?
Well, I think to be human is to be a relational creature. So you just mentioned
Yeah.
connection,
Yeah.
and we are made to be connected. We evolved in connection with the wild earth.
Yeah.
It helped make us as we encountered it. And our encounters are a constant interplay of information. So uh, I believe we're wired for information, and our awareness is based on the kinds of information that we take in or avoid.
Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
Thoughts can create emotions, and emotions can create thoughts. It depends on the context for how that is going. I it can become problematic when thoughts create emotions that are based on the thoughts that create them, an idealized emotion. I think that's part of a lot of problems in the outlook of modern life, where the mind-centered, thought-centered, conceptual-centered mind starts to dominate the emotions. Our emotions start to get adapted to that rather than being expressive on their own.
Is
But
thinking
again, a thought can create an emotion when you think of something happening somewhere, the war in Ukraine going on. The emotions that it draws out. Uh, Clearly, that can happen. And just as emotions, when you feel something and it starts to percolate up, um, it starts into awareness. It can create the thoughts, maybe why this is going on.
yeah. Really good. I appreciate how articulate you are and you're communicating to me well. Is thinking more
Okay.
innate or more invented?
I think thinking originates innately and gets invented as we develop.
Yeah.
Uh, I believe we are born with brains capable of thought. There's a long developmental process, and as we mature, we can alter we can choose not to think. You know, a lot of people that, you know, I heard of an ex-president recently who declared that he can declassify documents simply by thinking, which I thought raised the interesting, you know, judicial question of what if that person were not capable of thinking? Who would they still be declassified? You know, I don't know.
That's good. And it's sad. I mean, in a way, it's sad that I laugh, you know, because it's, I mean, you said I heard, and then you want to believe, well, was your source reliable?
People have told me that.
Word of mouth. Okay, fill in the blank, Gene. I don't know what I think until I
Become aware of it,
yeah.
which can happen in the thinking sometimes, but often happens, you know, after the thought,
Yeah.
after the fact, so to speak.
Can humans think without language?
Oh yeah, yeah. We there are many ways. I mean, I have a book called Italian Without Words. You know, with all of the gestures and, you know, so
That's good.
you know, there's a language of gestures. You know, there's a continuum of a language of gestures from animals into human, with the transition coming where humans become capable of self-conscious gesturing. But the fact that we can become self-conscious of gesturing doesn't mean that the earlier animal kinds of gesturing disappears. That's still with us as well, you know.
Yep.
So, and then there's also other aspects of thought. You know, I'm a student of the philosopher Charles Peirce, who invented semiotics and also pragmatism, and he was a logician and a mathematician. And he claimed that all thought is inferential, and he claimed that all thought is diagrammatic. And diagrammatic thinking in mathematics for him often involved kinds of signs that were not just symbols. You know, I mean, you may use a symbolic mark, but he delineated three different major kinds of signs: iconic signs, where the quality of the sign is what is conveyed and what is represented and meant to be interpreted. Indexical signs, where there's just a bumping of, like a weather vane, the wind bumps it, and then symbolic signs, which are conventional. And that, in that third realm, is where linguistic language, I think, becomes significant. But even there, we, as I began in the answer, there's gestural forms of communication that are not simply linguistic.
You really got into a lot of what we're going to cover, Gene. Thank you. Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
Well, if it's with someone you love, you can give them a hug.
Oh,
you can.
God, that's my favorite answer.
You can.
Well, I'll tell you, Gene, one
yeah.
thing really quick. Guy, a couple months ago, when I asked him that, he goes, group hug. Like you started right off with the ultimate hug. That is an amazing word to say what to do when language breaks down. Just to say that. So you can go on, but I was really amazed, because to think that there's you don't have to have a word when you're hugging someone. You can. And it is hard to hug people all the time. A lot of people are real huggy, and then some people aren't huggy. And, you know, you have to suss that out. But just to say that was mind blowing. So go ahead. You can elucidate on it if you want.
Well, you know, touch is, I think, the basis of consciousness. It's the oldest aspect of our consciousness and possibly of life, you know. So touch goes deep. I mean, the scenario that occurred to me when you asked the question was, of two people in a conversation, and the language is breaking down by miscommunication or
Yeah.
misunderstanding. And in that sense, I think a hug would be good. We know, I mean, there's other ways of when language breaks down. You know, that where the other kinds of gestural forms. So take this, for instance. People will use that when language breaks down. It
That's
communicates. Maybe in some situations it's correct, you know. But then what is this?
Right.
So, for example, on another use of this, a couple of years ago, my granddaughter, my stepdaughter was driving, and she looks in the rearview mirror, and her 5-year-old daughter in the back seat said, "Hey, Mom," and she's going like this, you know. So a lot of parents would say, "Don't do that," you know. But my stepdaughter had the presence of mind to say, "What's going on?" or, you know, what? And my granddaughter said, "These are my two longest fingers."
Oh my God, that's amazing.
And you know, we bring expectations to communication, but you know, which is good because many times they come true. But there's an example of a communication that began gesturally,
Yeah.
and it was, you know, it was so easy for language to break down there by just shutting it down, but by opening it up, you know, they had a beautiful experience.
But do you think she eventually told her that gesture in normal society, you better be careful with it?
Yeah,
Or she
I'll have to get on that. I'll ask and
because
see. You
you
know,
might not want it to introduce it to her at that point.
yeah.
Yeah,
When the
that
whole classroom of her, you know, her class of kids is showing the teacher their longest fingers on math, you know, that could be problematic, maybe.
your observations of humans in general. I know it's a stupid question, but are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
I think genetically, evolutionarily, constitutionally, we're more feeling beings in the sense that that's older equipment. We come with a much longer past of the development of the passions, and the thinking cognitive capacities are much more recent, and in that sense, they've had less time to develop, and in a sense, are relatively less matured. So I
That's
think by
yeah.
constitution we're like that, and it can become problematic when the thinking side wants to assert its primacy. I think a lot of our problems in the modern world have to do with that.
Amazing. Yeah, that's I'm going to divert with a question because it seems as though this wording you just told me might apply. Billy Wilder, the Hollywood director, said black and white is more true than color. So I ask at photography workshops, why would he say that? We live in a color world. Why would someone say black and white is more true? And I get all these answers. It's less distracting, blah, blah, blah. But I think it is maybe more so because it's older equipment. And the and color is more recent. The words you use.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I don't know. That could be it. It and you know, he as a filmmaker, you're wondering, you know, what he had in mind. Did he mean that for what he's trying to convey in films? There is a beautiful movie, called Embrace of the Serpent. I don't know if you've seen that, out of
I haven't, but go
Colombia.
ahead. Yeah.
And my understanding is that the filmmaker, it's shot in the Amazon jungle, and he shot it in black and white because he felt that color would overwhelm the story he was trying to
Yeah.
tell. So I wonder if Wilder meant something in that
Oh,
direction.
that's the overwhelm thing is the answer I normally get.
Mhm.
I get that 80% of the time. But I think it could be also, it's not one answer is more correct than the other. It's just people rarely say, well, because black and whites has been around. We've been looking
Mhm.
at black and white longer. So we
Yeah.
think when you're showing a photograph or showing a film and it's in black and white, it has this, it reeks more of honesty. He's just saying truth,
Mhm.
whatever that is. Yeah. So these are two questions from Alan Turing, 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Yes. Uh, Thinking gives us capacities to inquire into nature, into the ultimate questions of nature, and as that in that context, it can be another instrument of the soul.
Yeah. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
I'm not convinced. I know that that's a major issue going on in AI today. Um, I don't think uh, machines are capable of the self-correcting self-determination and especially self-origination of experience. I don't think they're capable of self-originated experience that includes spontaneity, the capacity to be spontaneous in a situation uh, where new elements can emerge. Um, I'm sure that there are great arguments that AI people could give against me on that.
Yeah.
But there's also the fact that a thinking machine is not a feeling machine.
Yeah.
Uh, and I really do think that thinking is a relatively unmatured capacity rooted in the passions. And then when separated off, can become problematic, uh,
Yeah.
can become, like a out of control force. Chesterton said the madman is not the man who lost his reason. He's someone who lost everything except his reason. And that's my kind of sense of what a claim for machine thinking can be. Again, I'm open to
G
the
GK
opposing arguments.
Yeah,
G.K. Chesterton, yeah.
what an amazing, huge influence on McLuhan. Yeah. Do you no, we'll get into that. That was good. Uh, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I don't know if I can really separate them. To me, happiness is completely immersed in a meaningful life.
Yeah.
Um, so it's hard to distinguish them. What I usually do is to distinguish happiness from pleasure. Pleasure
Yeah.
being something that is more of a sensation, that's more of a stimulus response, and more diminishing as the button is pressed more and more for pleasure. Whereas happiness is something more sustainable, potentially. But of course, it can only be sustainable insofar as it is meaningful.
Well, that's the question I got basically from Viktor Frankl, because he says happiness doesn't necessarily last, but meaning does.
I don't know if I agree with that. I'm a great fan of Viktor Frankl, but I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, happiness to me has its being in a sense of the good life,
Yeah.
the good life that one is living, that one is related to with one's family, friends, and the greater community. And so the good life is one where happiness should be an element of that. Uh,
Yeah.
there's a cheap sense of happiness, but I do believe that it's something that is sustainable.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I believe that mind is greater than brain, that brain is an evolved product of mind, um, and that our brains develop in in a relationship with with mind that's greater than our individual brains. So, for example, when you learn a language, you're learning something from the culture that you did not create. When you, I think, consciousness is a part of life. The human trajectory is to go on to the possibility of self-consciousness that we do share with some other animals we know now, but that this that it's important to distinguish mind as something greater than just the brain.
That's good. Gene, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Speed of light is not only 186 million miles per second squared, I think it's the law. I'd got to go with that. Fast, winged thought can be pretty quick, but it takes time to occur. And that time is based on what I once heard Max Lerner say in a conversation with the anthropologist Victor Turner that I was part of. He talked about the synoptic gospels, not the synaptic biblical gospels, but the synoptic, I'm sorry, not the synoptic gospel. I said the reverse. The synaptic gospels, the synapses, as this kind of parading symphony of thought moving. But I still think it's slower than the speed of light. I mean, the actual speed of that.
That was good. You can't. Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
New tool for breaking into a house?
Well, that's the thing. You put it into the context you want. So because I opened some of the questions with cue quotes doesn't mean you have to apply it. So it could be there's three aspects. It could be what tool do you gravitate towards? What new tool do you gravitate towards? Or what tool do you gravitate towards to dismantle the master's house? So she's a poet, and that could be metaphorical. So
I got it. Yeah. Well, I would say that the tool that you can find or the tool that you can imagine would be my first go-tos, preferable to the tool that you can purchase. So the tool you can find, I've been on walks with my grandkids where we find, a little branch, a stick, and it becomes a tool of all kinds of new games to play. Or the tool you can imagine. I've told stories to my grandkids, and I invented a time traveler, which is a white sphere that this kid from the future comes and visits them, and they go off on adventures anywhere throughout history. It's all open then. So, I mean, those are kinds of tools that have wide application. I guess someone could say, well, are they practical? Well, no, but if you do that enough, you'll get to the practical thing when you need it, maybe.
Dude, you did the follow-up question without me participating. That was good. One could ask. That was really good because I've never had that answer. People think they have to name a tool. And sometimes they go intuition. I go, oh, that's great. People don't think, or they think, they say, whatever. But they think tool implies more tangible. But it is fun how many people don't stick to the tool being implied as being tangible. So for you to say the tool you can find or imagine was beautiful. But it's almost in the essence of that you anticipated, because someone said, inspired me to ask the follow-up question, what new toy do you suggest?
What new toy do I suggest? That
Because
is a
you
tough.
almost implied that, because you said, well, we can find a stick and use it as a toy.
I
See,
see. Okay.
so
So
that was
did I
interesting.
get off the hook then?
No, yeah, I still want you to answer it, but it was amazing how people actually constantly are anticipating the next question. Why does that happen? I don't know. It's just amazing. But I mean, what new toy do you gravitate towards?
Well, going back to my previous answer, I just
Yeah,
remembered William Blake once said, "All that is now proved was once imagined, was once only imagined.
only imagined. Yeah.
All that is now proved was once only imagined." And that's, I think, where the imaginative tools can come from. And again, I'd want to. I was giving it kinds of examples that could be toys. I do believe that found toys, imagined toys, can be the best toys,
Yeah.
especially in this world, and this, especially America, which has what, 3 or 4% of the population of kids in the world, but like 40% of or more, the last time I checked, of toys sold are sold in America. So there's a
Wow.
heavy marketing to kids that's been going on for a couple of decades now. Um, Seductive marketing, either directly to the kid
Oh,
or
yeah.
to the kid to offset the mom. There's the whole the sacred ritual of materialism called Christmas, which is about acquisition of toys that are consumed. So given, and I could go on there, on and on. So given all of that, when you see the joy a kid can have with something that doesn't have, all of these Marvel characters endorsing it, it doesn't cost anything. That allows the play of the imagination to develop.
Yeah.
That's the toy I'd want to
Yeah, and it reminded
go
me
for.
of, Life in Hell. Matt Groening had a cartoon comic before The Simpsons, and the mother
I
sees the
remember that. Yeah.
kid the mother sees the kid playing with a plastic gun, and she takes it and goes, "I don't want you playing with war toys." And so he goes outside and he picks up a stick and goes, "Choo, choo, choo." So it is, there's a lot of complexity. Okay, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I try not to.
Yeah,
I try to relax when I go to sleep. I give thanks for the day that I just had,
good.
and and try to relax. Uh,
Beautiful.
you know,
Gene,
but I mean, sometimes you can worry. You have things to worry about,
yeah,
um, state of the world and that. But
yeah.
if it gets to be where it's not going to let me sleep, I know that problem will be there tomorrow.
Yep. Gene McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. So, by artists, I mean painters, harmonica players, uh, authors, artists of artists as the antenna of the race are broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career, Gene, why do we humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Kill the messenger is a long and esteemed tradition of kill the messenger.
Yeah,
The message that you don't want to hear or see
yeah,
and can be in denial of. When it's there. I mean, the beauty of, I don't think the purpose of art is to do these things, to show, but that's what happens when art is happening as with
yeah,
the vulnerability of the artist. to, art can be prophetic, not because it is trying to look at the future, but because it's honestly looking at the present and removing those veils to the present to go right to the heart of things. And, the kinds of issues of the day or technical, the implications of the machines and techniques, all that can come through. But, it's like if someone's telling you that there's going to be a plague, there's going to be a plague, there's going to be a plague, after a while, people don't want to hear that.
Yep. Well, what you said is Wyndham Lewis's one of his main maxims. Artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
So, Gene, do artists have moral obligation?
As people, they do. As persons, as spouses and parents and children and all of that. In the work, I don't think that's the primary consideration. I think the aesthetic job is so demanding that that's where their energies need to be.
What do you think the motive of the cave artist was?
To be alive in the wonder of life.
Same answer. That is great. You got a good mantra there, too.
I think they're our ultimate role models,
Yeah.
I mean, when I look at cave art, I'm just always awed at this is being in and of the animals depicted. It's not only the artistic abilities, going back 30,000 and more years ago, but you're in that with them. They are able to enter into that mind of the and movement of the animals. And so, I've been writing about Aboriginal and indigenous consciousness and development in some recent work, and this sense of being participant with your habitat, and then being able to depict that in this work on a cave wall, which combines, as you often see in many hunter-gatherer religions, the completely practical and the completely reverential. So the reverential can be seen in the admiration that's obvious in the depiction of, these running deer or bulls or whatever, aurochs. But there's also that, this is also putting you in the mind of the animal for tomorrow's hunt. All of which is to be alive in the wonder of life, it seems to me.
And now all we do is the same thing. We duct tape a banana to the wall and call it art.
It has appeal.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or old ideas?
I'm not afraid of ideas.
Yeah.
And, there's good and bad ideas in both directions of time.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
One of my earliest memories I've gone back to recently was being on the street, or being on the block where I was about 3-4 years old, and seeing a group of kids, like a little band or something. They had like a drum or something like that across the street. And I've been wondering, was I in that, or did I just imagine that from later, or what? And around, and the same time being in a neighbor's apartment who had a like a picnic table, with the bench connected to the table as their kitchen table. So that's kind of my earliest. But it came up. My mother passed away a few months back, and we had a ceremony at the cemetery, and that cemetery in Jersey City, New Jersey, right on the edge of the cemetery, where I could see it from the gravesite, was where I had lived. Where I was born in that neighborhood and lived the first 4 years of my life there, and so it kind of like brought back that memory at that time.
Wow. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
It's more of a blessing that we're fortunate to have. It can become a curse.
Yeah.
Certainly traumatic memories have that kind of quality of curse. But to me, it's a blessing to be able to have a present that can enlarge back into our own personal past and our family stories and our legacy, and we know now, with the all the ways we've opened up memory of the deep past as well. Yeah. That all seems to me to be a blessing. I remember talking with a guy who was known as the father of Soviet sociology, who was visiting South Bend, and this was right after the fall of the Soviet Union, and he was describing what was going on there as this oppressive past weighing over everything, and trying to free themselves from this oppressive past of the Stalinism and all of that. And I commented to him, that in many ways it's almost the opposite problem in America, where people, the past is what happened a day or two ago, and past that, people is oblivion.
Yeah.
People not keeping a past or a history, a personal or larger history as part of their mind.
That's David Lee Roth. Here today, gone later today.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Tell me someone, just briefly, within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, who had an impact on you like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Within my family and outside of my family. Within my family, my mother and father, early on, my mother had a great sense of humor. And I, over the years, appreciated it more and more. When in the last year of her life, she died at almost 94. And in the last year of her life, even with dementia, she said something to me and to my brother that I put into the obituary. And that was, if I should kick the bucket, I want you to remember I've had a happy life and I've loved everyone in it. So she was making a serious statement, but it began with, if I kick the bucket, that kind of being able to be light about it.
Yeah.
My father also was an influence early on with exercise and getting physical exercise and athletics. He put me on a trajectory in that direction. He was in the New Jersey State Police, and physical exercise was an important part of the job. So he had us, my brother and I, jogging back before the jogging craze had kicked in, and lifting weights and doing things like that.
Yeah. That was good, Gene. There's a statement, though, that your mom said. It's amazing. If I kick the bucket. So she's almost applying like maybe I might not, or it's sort of a funny
if I should kick the bucket. Yeah.
Is the follow-up question on her statement to you is, can you forget to die?
Can you forget to die? Of course.
Wow.
That's not saying that dying is going to forget it. You can forget dying, but dying's not going to forget it.
Yeah, but you should see how many people, first of all, can handle the question. And second of all, I think it's positive attitude say, yes, you can forget to die. But a lot of people say, no, you can't.
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah.
And it's almost like anyways, that was interesting. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yes, I was raised Catholic, Roman Catholic.
Did you check out, or are you still practicing?
I checked out. I had penguins in elementary school and Christian Brothers in high school. And actually, toward the end of my high school, um, probably some of my religion classes got me thinking more about the idea that the Bible was not meant to be taken literally. It was meant to be taken with metaphors,
Yeah.
And that began a journey first of doubting those beliefs, and then I returned to a more religious, spiritual outlook as I developed,
Do you
but
pray?
not organized religion.
Do you pray?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I begin each day with kind of a setting the tone for the day of
Yeah.
um, asking for to bring joy, to bring love, to bring kindness, purpose, and um, and to live my vision fully and fearlessly
Beautiful.
each day.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Well, first of all, there's a strong philosophical argument to be made, as Charles Peirce made it, that God does not exist, yet God is real.
Ooh, that's good. I like
Just
that.
as gravity does not exist, but is real, the law of gravity is real, and it will determine every object, say, around the earth to fall. But if there's no objects falling at this moment
Yeah.
in existence, the reality of that law is a general that will cover those that would fall.
Yeah.
So he made what?
Gene, this is funny because they asked Harold Bloom,
Yeah.
do you believe in God? And he goes, no, my wife is an admirable and honest atheist. My attitude towards Yahweh is that I don't like him and I don't trust him and I wish he'd go away, but I know he won't. That's sort of like it, and then he says, because he's built
like death, same as death,
Yeah, it could exact next line. Because he's built into the language, as Nietzsche said. He's part of the way we think. As soon as you use a verb involving being, you're in trouble.
I completely agree.
It's really well.
God is not a noun, but that's how the word is used.
It's exactly.
There was a linguist I was in communication with 15 years ago. Unfortunately, he passed away not much after that. But he had, his name was Dan Moonhawk Alford. And he had a really interesting article, God is a Verb. And he tried to argue that you find he was talking about indigenous languages, Native American languages, the predominance of verbs in the language versus nouns.
Yeah.
And so it would be something like godding or the creation, and this idea that we could fix things in a noun is not only a bad way to live in general, but it's particularly bad for trying to describe the creation or the creator.
That's also Bucky Fuller. I seem to be a verb.
I seem to be a verb.
Yeah, that's that's the name of his book. But anyways,
I didn't know that one. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
But I use that Hopi. The Hopis have I say the Hopis have no nouns. They only have verbs. But you say predominant, so it sounds better if you say.
I say what?
It sounds better if you say predominantly the Hopis or indigenous American Indians have verbs. If you say,
I think this guy Dan Moonhawk Alford had claimed that in Algonquian languages, two men could speak for an hour without using any nouns.
Right, but do they have no nouns? That's was my question. See, I read somewhere they have no nouns; they only have verbs. But I said your way is better because then you're not disputing anthropologists who said no, they have some nouns, but they mainly use verbs. But anyways, back to the question: do you want to answer it? What would you like God to say to you if God does exist after you die?
I told you were sick. Actually, the other day I was looking up. I was looking up the biographical information on Spike Milligan, and he got on his tombstone. They wouldn't let him put it in the religious cemetery. I told you I was sick in English, but they let him write it in Irish because they figured not less people would know what it meant. I don't know. I kind of went from there. It's probably a
no. There's a
more
lot
reverent
of
answer, but
yeah, no. There's a lot of one of my favorite answers was another comical dude. He goes, we checked the records. We made a mistake. We're sending you back. Yeah. Do evil?
Well, there's a story of in rabbinical lore of this very devout Jew who didn't smoke or drink or womanize or do anything, and goes into something like heaven.
Yeah.
But is not admitted because he didn't know how to live in the afterlife.
Wow. Well, that's like the guy goes to hell, and the devil's standing at the gate, and he peeks in, and they have Zoom in hell. And so the guy goes, "You have Zoom in hell?" And the devil goes, "That's all we got."
Oh, boom.
It's like fill in the blank. You could do anything, cable TV, electric cars. You could just fill it in with anything. You have spoken word in hell. That's all we got.
I retired a couple of years ago from the University of Notre Dame teaching there. And my last half semester was when the pandemic kicked in and we switched to Zoom. So we all had to learn how to use Zoom.
Yeah.
And one of the two courses I was teaching was on media and technology.
Yeah.
And I had, at the beginning of the semester, it was in the syllabus, planned for that first day on Zoom for this class. So we did it. And the theme of the first class on Zoom was the dangers of too much screen time.
Yeah.
And I'm confronting the faces of my class, and we all just were breaking up just because, the irony of it working out that way.
Well, the big irony is I've done live events with human beings in a room for 40 years. And for the last 2 years, they're better on Zoom than they were live. And people don't like to hear that. They're more attentive. You don't have to park. You don't have to drive. I have people from all over the world now. So I'm sorry to say that they're better, but that's how I feel. I don't abandon live events. I still do live events, but it is easier and blah, blah, blah. So,
the whole idea of appropriate technology, Zoom is really good for distant events, telecommunication. It's the problem where when the teenage boy and the teenage girl are talking to each other and they live a block away, on some kind of media device when they could actually be face to face, to see each other.
Yeah, appropriate technology, because I used to do one interview a month. Now I do 4 a week.
That's great. Yeah.
It is great. It's amazing because I get to talk to really smart people like you and learn a lot. So take this one on, Gene. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Yes.
Well, here's the
evil people exist, and that's not to say how they got to be evil.
Yeah.
but they do exist.
Yeah.
And evil also uses people, and it can be viral. It can be contagious.
Yeah.
It can have this dark energy that can spread.
Yeah. Well, the follow-up is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So there's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, that makes sense, where you give in to the drama of the enemy that they may want to impose on you. I can also see the opposite. If you don't acknowledge your enemy, you can empower them.
Yeah.
And so it's depends on the enemy and the context. It seems to me what you don't want to do is to acknowledge a kind of a drama that will take a life of its own, or empower that enemy's purpose against you. That may mean not acknowledging. That may mean not embracing closer, but getting away from, completely. But it could also mean, there's a great word, oppugnancy, to oppose, to be oppugnantly opposed. When Hitler said what he was going to do in Mein Kampf, he did it. And you couldn't talk him out of it. And
Yeah.
it needed that opposition. So he needed to be acknowledged through opposition, through military opposition. So I
Well,
think there's that aspect,
yeah,
but again,
Gene,
it's, Mhm.
that's a good point. But Ram Dass says, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush. It's like fill in the blank. I'm having a real hard time loving DT, or loving Putin, or loving what can you do about it? How do you keep your government from going to war?
Well, sometimes you shouldn't keep it from going war. It depends on the war.
Yeah.
I think that Hitler required a war. But Vietnam was not a war America should have fought.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, I think if you to acknowledge, I think Putin needs to be acknowledged, but not empowered.
Yeah.
So it's hard to. I really like the Watts quote that you gave, but yet there's nuances of acknowledge and empowerment. That dialectic, I think, that are depend on the situation.
No, you did it well, because a lot of people go, if you don't acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. So
Mhm.
it comes down to the words. What does acknowledgement mean? What does enemy mean? So let's move on.
Oh yeah, one more point though. You
Yeah,
mentioned
go
the
ahead.
Ram Dass quote about loving your enemy.
Yeah.
I'll go to my go-to, Hitler again.
Yeah.
Hitler's mother lost 3 children in the 2 years before Hitler was born. The psychoanalyst Alice Miller did a psychoanalysis of Hitler, and you can understand how those deaths probably screwed him up royally, and so you can see the person who might be behind the monster,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that excuses him.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that the genocide he was committing should not be stopped, regardless of whether you love him or not. That other issue needed to be undertaken.
Yeah. Really good point. And it falls perfectly into this line. Nassim Taleb. Games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really won or lost, but you can tell who a hero is and who is not a hero. What's the function of heroism?
Well, I think that heroism is the acknowledgement we give to people who have done, amazing acts.
Yeah.
I don't, I don't know about the word function. It's almost
Well,
like exceptional rather than function. The
well
hero is more
here's
as an exception.
yeah, but Gene, here's the problem. I'm leading into a follow-up on the enemy question. So I introduced this quote, and then really what I'm trying to get to is ask, does punishment work? So then I struggled. I'm still working on this, and I appreciate your input because I don't know what to ask after I give the hero quote. I think the hero quote is good. You don't know who really won or lost, but you can tell who a hero is. And then I usually just stop there and I go, someone responded to the hero quote by saying, villains don't think they are bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. So the follow-up question then is, does punishment work? So I overwhelm them if I do the hero quote, the reaction to the hero quote, and say, does punishment work? So I figured, well, what should I do with the hero quote? And I thought, it's stupid saying what is the function of heroism. It's too evident. So I don't know how to lead into this. Does
Mhm.
punishment work? It comes out of Bateson, sort of, but it's interesting that one person said villains don't think they are bad, because that's what I learned from Bateson is when the criminal gets caught, they might not go, I'm doing something morally wrong. They might go, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day. So you see what I'm saying? When they differentiated, they say, well, there's villains and heroes. Villains don't think they're bad, they want control. Heroes want freedom. So,
I think
anyways,
there are many heroes that are inadvertent heroes who don't want anything.
yeah,
They spontaneously, you know, like we've been seeing in Florida, some of these people going, the cameraman for the news team going in and helping to carry the nurse out of the
yeah,
car, in the flood. These are heroic acts that
yeah.
it's not a pre-planned intention. They just are live to the moment, and the heroism is in that being alive in the wonder of
That's
life
it.
in that
That's
moment.
yeah.
Being
There,
alive enough to know that without thinking or knowing,
yeah,
this needs to be done. I need to do this.
yeah. But then back to it. Do you agree? Villains don't think they are bad. They want control. And what do we do with them? Do we punish them? Does punishment work?
I've seen a lot of criminals who they're the victim basically, or it's not they when they're supposed to show remorse in court, it's remorse that they got caught. So
Yeah,
there's that, and I don't expect that you know criminals in general are going to do that, but that may also be different from punishment. There's we're supposed to have a criminal justice system that yes punishes, but is supposed to be rehabilitative. But that's usually given short shrift. Um, there was a really interesting news article yesterday of the convicted, I guess, convicted felons who were let out during COVID. There were the percentage who were recidivism, who recommitted crimes, was like 0.15%, not 15%, but 0.15, less than 1%. So it was like 11 people out of, I don't know, 10, 15,000, something like that. And normally when people go to prison and get out at the end of their sentence or even let loose earlier, it's a much higher rate of recidivism. So this was raising the question. This said a lot of these people were elderly, that there's a tendency with aging or very sick, the tendency in those two groups to, they're not going to be committing crimes at the same rate. So to re-examine our sense of what a length of term should be. So there's that. And then, there's a question of, what is the seriousness of rehabilitation? I also happened to see a few days ago, I don't know why these just were in the news this week, but prisoners not being paid in a few states in the South, anything, or being paid pennies. And yet they're doing work that the state is profiting by. Yeah. And, if you were to give them more decent pay and they were to show that they're capable of work, and if they had less recidivism for that, and you let them back in the world, we wouldn't be paying for it. Just like the ones who were let out during COVID, that reduced the costs there. So it was like a win-win, cost efficient, and something that other than just straight out punishment was working.
Yep. Because what if we put DT in jail? Big deal. What's that going to do? That's like he's put in a country club jail and gets his hand slapped. That's like I saw the movie, the something guys in the room, the Enron movie. So it showed how these Enron guys got busted and they got all thrown in country club jail. So what? I went up to the producer of the film and I goes, "Is your film just a training film for up and coming capitalists?" And he goes, "Yeah, I guess so." So, does punishment work? It's a difficult thing because we want to think reform is something, but if someone's killing somebody, what are you going to do with them? You're going to punish them or you're going to lock them up? Well, you hopefully,
Yeah, I was accenting the positive before, but I do think there are people that need to be put away for life.
Yeah.
That are not going to come around and are a threat and danger to society.
Yeah. So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Can I just ask, when you said he was the first projectionist, you mean he was showing movies? He was working.
Joyce ran a cinema called Volta Cinema. The first.
I never knew that.
The first cinema in Dublin. He helped run the cinema. Yeah.
So why do we, instead of living, we have?
Yeah. Why do we recreate things?
Recreate it.
Yeah.
Well, that's what, in a sense, the cave painters were doing as well.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a joy and wonder in being able to manifest.
Yeah.
To envision and manifest. Recreation is a kind of creation as well.
Yeah.
The problem becomes when you start living from that and not from living.
Yeah. Yeah, you've already answered this in a lot of ways because I scooted up the cave painting question. So let's go into your careers briefly. You've got a lot of things you've pursued, but why don't you give me, if you could, your tipping points? When did you go, I'm going to make sociology my profession as a professor? What's the tipping point? What's the tipping point where you go, well, I don't know if you call yourself a poet, but you write poems and lyrics. So let's put those together. What were you reading or hearing going, I can do that? And then harmonica playing. So you can go at it, Gene.
Well, this question is reminding me of an earlier one you asked that I didn't answer.
Yeah.
I went inside my family influences, outside my family. I didn't answer that.
Oh my
So,
God, I scooted out. Go
but it
ahead.
relates to this question because outside of my family, an early influence, and when I was talking about my father and exercise, it reminded me in high school, one of the Christian brothers, it was brother Malachi, was the
Yeah.
track and field coach, and he would have my high school had really good high jumpers and pole vaulters, and he would have the pole vaulters. He would suggest to them a few days a week to go surfing. I grew up on the Jersey Shore.
Yeah.
And that idea really stuck with me. The idea that you don't have to do the activity that you're practicing in order to practice the activity.
Yeah.
And that kind of freedom, it just has stuck with me throughout my life. So, when I play music or write lyrics, or let's just say play music, I found that it has benefits for my writing. It's not easy to say what they are. It's not one-to-one,
Yeah.
but that drawing out a story, developing a narrative.
Yeah.
But before I get to that, you mentioned you went like this, tipping points.
Yeah.
So from high school, people wanted me to get high.
Right.
People wanted me to get high in college.
Yeah.
I'm talking about people wanted me to get high in college.
Yeah.
So Bobby Knight, the basketball coach, tried to get me to get high at West Point when he was the last year there before he went to Indiana University at Bloomington. He sent me a letter and asked me to play basketball there. And I ended up, I also had people at Princeton who wanted me to get high in the high jump and basketball. And so I was a high jumper. I played about a year of basketball in college, and I also was a high jumper throughout college and afterward. And in my second year in college, you mentioned tipping point, and you went like this.
Yeah.
So I literally had a tipping point from being a high jumper who went and jumped over the bar this way, sideways, to watching Dick Fosbury win the Olympics in Mexico City, tipping backwards.
Oh my God.
And I thought, I got to try this. So I tried it, and I didn't have the right technique. He would run in on a curve to set up an angle here, and then it would be like leverage, almost like a pole vault, like a leverage thing. I found that out later when I worked with his coach. So my tipping point was I improved over a half a foot in 2 months by switching to that style that he invented.
Wow.
And I went from being pretty good in the East Coast to national class, and then kind of in a national world class. And I later got to know Fosbury. I was in the Olympic trials in 1972, and he lived a few blocks from the stadium, and I had worked with his coach, and he invited me to stay at his house between the NCAA championships and the Olympic trials. So we had like a high jumpers commune there. It was just a ton of fun. But I mean, he's to me, not only is he a great person, he's one of the great, most successful revolutionaries of the 60s, because everybody jumps that way now.
Wow.
And he in effect kind of like stumbled on it. He was doing the scissors style where your two legs go over sideways, and he would try to avoid hitting his ass on the bar, and that eventually turned into the backwards flop style. So that was an early tipping point for me, being able to engage in that activity. Melville said whaling was my Harvard and Yale, and for me, high jumping was that. Although I was at Princeton, but it stayed with me, and it put me into college where I was the first in my family to go to college, and I loved everything I found there. Um, and but I had a couple of different, almost a triangulation of uh, there was high jumping and athletics, basketball my first year. There was studies that were exciting, but I was kind of new to it, and there was a lot of really smart people, and I just felt really out of my class there. And then there was the 60s, and the counterculture, hippie culture, so I was in all three of those. Uh, I started realizing through the hippie counterculture that I was a participant in that I like to read stuff that wasn't assigned in courses. And I like to learn stuff that wasn't in courses. And I started taking on an interest in some of this stuff. And by the end of college, I had an interest in pursuing my studies further. So I ended up going to the University of Chicago. I was in a program in human development, but my interest became more theoretical and philosophical as I was there. So I had a kind of a mixed background with psychology and anthropology. I studied with, a number of anthropologists there, but also pursuing social theory as well. And I was punished for it, and that was helpful too. I had to do they called it a preliminary exam, and my first answer, you develop the questions and the answer to get the questions approved, and my first answer was on this idea of a philosopher who invented semiotics and pragmatism, Charles Peirce. One reviewer said, that's 19th century thought, that's obsolete, and was going to fail it. Then they got another reader who recommended the same answer for honors. This is all helpful. I also got involved in a project to study things in people's homes. And I remember at my dissertation proposal hearing, one outside reader on the committee asked, well, what kind of studies have been done in this area? And I said, well, there's, anthropologists can do this in other cultures, but in America, there's very, very little, almost nothing there. And this person responded, well, why would you want to do it then? And it was a deep insight for me into the idiocy that inhabits academic minds. Of course you want to do it because it hasn't been done, not because it has been done. So anyway, I went, through this program, and that work I published with my dissertation advisor, co-author, a very well-known psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who's known for his concept of flow, and is not as well known as a plagiarist, which he was, and he practiced that not just with me, but with other people, including in his early work, the guy who used the term flow instead of what Csikszentmihalyi was using. He had another term. Anyway, that made it difficult with him for me to get a job, but I ended up getting my job at the University of Notre Dame. But throughout this, I was pursuing interests in, the study of things in people's homes was an empirical study of 300 families, 3-generation families. Yeah. But I also had these other interests that I was being, basically punished for in college. I'm sorry, in grad school. And I, embarked on a career with a sense of like, if I need to preserve the vision as I develop it of what I want to do, because a lot of not that there's not good scholars out there and researchers, but there's also this kind of bureaucratic, deadening, pigeonholing mind at work that seems to have as its goal to destroy your soul.
Yeah.
And that never ended throughout my whole career.
Wow.
If anything, it's more prominent today, I think, especially for younger people coming in. And so I tried to keep my way through all of that. My three kind of heroes when I was a grad student were Herman Melville,
Yep.
Charles Peirce, the philosopher, and they're like opposites. He was a logician, and Melville was a sailor and a writer. But I
Yeah.
found ways of correspondence that connected their ideas for me in grad school. And then the third one was Lewis Mumford,
Oh yeah.
who was known for writing history of technology, history of cities. He was the architecture critic for the New Yorker for a number of years, and all three of them did not have a college degree.
Oh my God.
Mumford had to drop out of college because he got tuberculosis. They didn't think he'd live long. He lived to be 94. Melville was a sailor. And when he sent his first manuscripts, somebody in England for one of them said, well, a sailor couldn't write this. And Peirce only ended up getting a master's degree in chemistry. But when he was 13 or 14, probably 14 years old, he read for almost a year, a couple hours a day, Immanuel Kant's Critique of the Pure Reason, and claimed to have virtually almost memorized it. And he became familiar with all of the history of logic. And he was aware of 20 different languages. He was an original mathematician. He did a number of sciences, and he had a master's degree in chemistry. His buddy, William James, once wrote a piece called The PhD Octopus. And in that, he pointed out how a former student of his had been teaching for a year or two, but had not finished his PhD. And they were happy with his teaching, but they wanted to fire him because he didn't finish his PhD. And he said, well, why is this so much emphasis of this going on? So that has led me to my interests, more scholarly interests. That's my dissertation became a book called The Meaning of Things, and that became a kind of a keystone to emerging fields of material culture studies in the social sciences, and also has been an influence on like museum scholarship and so forth. And I in my second book, it's called Meaning and Modernity, and I set out to try to take a lot of ideas from philosophical pragmatism and, in a sense, translate them into social theory. And then in the second half of the book, I went back to some more culture studies. So I continuing some of my work on the meaning of things. I had a chapter there called Remembrance of Things Present, and another one that took off from something that was not in the book, The Meaning of Things, on city symbols called The City as Living Memory. The way we can find ourselves in the things in which we find meaning in our habitat, in the home, but as well in the city, through the buildings, the places, the life that we can identify with. And one of the outcomes of that research was I developed a kind of back then I was calling it, I don't use this term anymore, critical animism, a theory of critical animism, that to be a self is not to be limited by your corporeal body, but that we are complexes of signs. And those signs extend into and derive from our habitat or environment. And so you and I are talking through this electronic medium now, but from my point of view, you are genuinely here, and I'm genuinely there, and we're both genuinely, in anyone who would be watching this, we have acts of communication that produce consequences. Charles Peirce said the meaning of an idea is its conceivable consequences in the future. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, the self doesn't even end with its physical death. There are consequences of acts. The love that you brought to your life, to your family, will live on, So these are some of the directions I've gone with that. And more recently, I have, I'll tell you, a book I published in 2014. Ever since grad school, I was interested in the idea of what has been known as the axial age, a period about 2,500 years ago, 600 BC, centered around that, but not limited to that, where a lot of new ideas broke out in different civilizations with some common themes of asceticism, of a reflective consciousness critique. So you find the Greek philosophers and the Chinese philosophers and Buddha overlapping in lifetimes. You find, and those would be three of the four main groups. Judaism is another, where you have the development of prophets and a people's religion rather than a state religion. Similarly, the kind of prophetic aspects of Buddha and Buddhism. And a lot of the ideas that broke out then in these different civilizations live with us today, so that more than half the world today is either Christian or Muslim. And those are ideas that stem from that. So if you take, again, the outbreak at that time, but then the kind of institutionalization and codification of it a few hundred years later, between 200 BCE and 200 CE, and the development out of Judaism of these other traditions of Christianity and the Muslim religion. This idea is associated with a philosopher, Karl Jaspers. And I discovered a Scottish folklorist from the 19th century who had all of these ideas and first started publishing them in 1873. So I wrote a book that resurrected this guy's ideas and his different kind of outlook from Karl Jaspers. But it also touched on something else that I was getting interested in, which is a kind of a history of consciousness, how the long-term evolution that has made us physically what we are had, into how has that development altered into the present? Again, I had earlier had an interest in meaning and modernity in the book that I came out with that title, but it led me to develop a term. We talk about unsustainable ecology, unsustainable economies, and yet and unsustainable politics. All of these are fueled by the beliefs people bring to them. So what would be an alternative? We talk about maybe a sustainable ecology or economy. I developed the term sustainable wisdom to look at what the past, including the deep past, might be able to inform us in our situation today of something more of the nature of sustainable wisdom, as opposed to our seeming world of unsustainable folly. Yeah. And that's what I'm working on now too. I helped co-organize a conference at Notre Dame on this theme about 5 years ago, and we had a great range of indigenous activists and scholars and other scholars and anthropologists, a wide range of different perspectives, and I co-edited the outcome of that conference. But now my own book is going to take off from where I've tried to develop this long-term history, looking at history as involving a genuine progress in precision, but counteracted by a contraction of mind from our original attunement to the wild earth, to the animate earth, having produced in our long 2 million year evolution what I call animate mind. That is the mind of the hunter-gatherers who lived in this attunement and balance, relative balance, and the profound changes that occurred with the advent of domestication, settlement, and agriculture, and rise of cities, and rise of especially way more hierarchically organized cities, and some of the achievements of civilization that it brought, such as warfare, not only literacy and things like that, but other kinds of things, and a profound disconnect from, as I'm trying to argue in this book, our sustainable past. Literally, people post-agriculturally, wherever agriculture broke out in the world, including the New World, not just the Old World, people literally got 4 to 6 inches shorter from decreased nutrition. Even though we think of agriculture, the standard story is we go from scarcity to the abundance of agriculture, but that agriculture produced population expansion and explosion, which meant you had to, spread out and get more and take more. And, whereas we would have like 40 different kinds of potential, greens, berries, nuts, and so forth, the turn toward agriculture, meant some particular grains like rice or wheat was the bulk of the nutrition source. So nutrition went down for the bulk of the population in hierarchically organized early societies. The elite, maybe a tiny elite, the king and the have better nutrition, but the ways in which we've contracted from an attunement to the earth, the animate earth, with animate mind, to what I call anthropocentric mind, where we start to take other humans as role models rather than the wild earth and its teachings. Rather than taking the wild earth as a teacher, we take it as something to be domesticated in agriculture, plants, and animals. And then we start coming up with these anthropocentric deities. The supernatural becomes much more pronounced with anthropomorphized deities. And then I argue, just to telescope here, that another contraction occurred in the outbreak of the modern era out of post-medieval, especially Europe, of a further contraction from the wild earth in our animate mind to an anthropocentric mind, to a further contraction to machine-centric mind, as if the universe really is just a machine and we are just simply computers or derivatives.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to argue in the book I'm writing now is those contractions are excluding elements of reality that cannot be sustained as excluded. And what I want to propose as an alternative is to find ways to reopen from those contractions, not to jettison these later developments, but to recontextualize them.
Yeah. Well, that was really a great summary, Gene, and I appreciate it. Just to do our homework here, I asked for 90 minutes, and we're almost at the 90-minute point.
Oh, wow.
We could go longer, or if you could go another 15, 20 minutes, that would be great. But in essence, I usually do about 40 of my questions, and we got through about 15 of them. So I'd love to do a part 2. So I don't know your schedule right now. Can you go another 10, 15, or 20 minutes now? Or are you willing to do a part 2 in the future? It would be 3 or 4 months or 2 months down the road.
I could do both. Yeah. Actually,
right.
On my side, your questions, it's like, it's not a 360. It's a 720. What is it? 720, or then extrapolations of that. They're all over the map. They're challenging.
I appreciate that. And you're it's really been great. And I do rush things, and I forgot that I didn't let you say you're outside the family. Then you didn't go, dude, you forget, you didn't let me get it in. But then eventually you said, I can answer this question by telling you what I was going to answer on the question you didn't let me answer. But you did it very politely. I'm not saying that. But let's go back to some of the stuff you just talked about for a few minutes, and that is, what's your career at Notre Dame then? You basically taught sociology there for how many years?
I was like 38 years, I think.
38 years, yeah. And so that's really impressive, and it's great. When you talked about Mumford, are you aware of media ecology? And Neil Postman and McLuhan started the MEA movement, sort of it, which is, they do their yearly event. I've spoke there a couple times, but Mumford is one of their top 8 people. It's like McLuhan, Postman, Mumford, and some others. So have you gone into the McLuhan world much? Especially because I'm just curious if you ever saw his book called The City as Classroom. So it was almost what you touched on, a similar title. He said this is classroom. So anything. I'm just curious of your dabbling in McLuhan at all or
Yeah,
anything?
well, I mentioned this course I was teaching that the last few years I was teaching. I felt it was important, and I wanted to end my teaching going through this uh, media and technology course. And so I
Yeah.
had all three of them in there: Mumford, McLuhan, Understanding Media,
Yeah.
and Neil Postman's what's his book title? The
Yeah. Neil Postman's probably about, well, he has several books, but anyways, you did teach all three of them. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, I remember chapters of Postman's book. Oh, Amusing Ourselves to Death. That's the
Yeah, that's
title. Yeah,
right.
and he talks about the um, what's it? The not the telegraphic, the typographic mind,
Yeah.
and his critique of the image culture replacing it. Yeah, so we had good discussions because I was sympathetic to that kind of an argument, and yet at the same time I felt he undervalued the role of image. Image is the problem, with uh, omnipresent images that are trying to manipulate us, and yet you can't deny a picture is worth 1,000 words as well.
Yeah.
So they were good for discussions. McLuhan, similarly, his idea of extensions
Yeah.
of the body. He may not have been the first to say that, but he did that. He took that in good directions.
Yeah.
And yet, I also found some problems with when he mentioned that we should become the servants of our devices and treat
Yeah.
them like gods. I don't think so. Uh, I mean, on his behalf, when I bought a car that had a rear view mirror, I have a difficult driveway to back out of. It was like I couldn't put myself into it at first, and then I gradually could. I could be one with what the
Yeah.
camera view was showing me. But we live in a world dominated by machines. The problem is that we have become the servants of these gods,
Yeah.
in a sense. The because he also talks about narcosis and numbing as
Hello.
necessary.
Very good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course that's when I go down the driveway, I numb. I don't have to look around, and I kind of numb to that. But that's also the problem. If you start to live in a world that's more and more machined, you become more and more numbed. The perfection of that world is to be completely numb,
Yeah.
to lose the wonder of living, of being in the wonder of life.
Yeah.
And so and he, again, this was great for class discussions. The idea of global village and centralization, decentralization. We kept having this yes, but no,
Yeah.
back and forth with him.
Well,
And
here's
Mumford, of course, is a great critic of
yeah.
modern technology. He's not anti-technology. He's in favor of appropriate technology.
Yeah.
But in his last two works, and I got to visit with Lewis in the
Nice.
1980s.
Yeah.
He was developing dementia at that time, so there were some days better than others.
Yeah.
But in his later work, he did a large scale, beyond the origins of modern Europe that he did in the 30s and 40s, post medieval, to beyond the bounds of earliest civilizations. And he developed an argument that the civilizations that developed the hierarchical, development of out of the beginnings of civilization, of those hierarchical ones that came to dominate, as the first mega machine. So it's a mega machine of mostly human parts. So the pyramid is not just the sleds that pull the rocks. It's the king, the pharaoh, the divine king, and the court, and the military, and the scribes, and all that. They are all elements of the machine. And Mumford believed that in the modern era, a new system directive came in, which is to replace as much as possible the human parts by mechanical parts, with the ultimate goal being to replace all of the human parts by the mechanical parts, which would be the ultimate dehumanization. So he was a severe critic of modern technology. And I just found it useful to pit him against, McLuhan or some of McLuhan with not only with Neil Postman, but also Jerry Mander, who I
Yeah.
think is another great critic of a lot of these issues, and also has his own kind of dialogue and dialectic with McLuhan and Postman.
Yeah. Well, one thing on Mander is, for reasons to eliminate TV or whatever.
Yeah.
Marshall was not for TV, but he was named like the new TV guru, and he got his picture on the cover of Newsweek. He was a prankster. He was a charlatan. He was a jokester. He came out of James Joyce and the Symbolists. But you read Wikipedia and it says Marshall McLuhan, media theorist. He said, I'm not a theorist, but he would probably go, yeah, leave that because I'm in academia. Like, you're called a sociology professor, but I think you're a little more than that. And you're almost like anti-sociology at times, or saying there's a bigger picture here, but you're going to go for your 38-year career of being called an anthropologist, or I mean, a sociologist professor. And so Mander was a little off in understanding Marshall, and it's easy to do that. You're supposed to get Marshall. That's the big thing. And he goes along with it. And it's that Marshall really preached suspended judgment in saying that it's like Pascal. In order to understand anything, you have to understand this end of the spectrum and that and everything in between. So you have to embrace what I learned from studying Frank Zappa. You have to embrace contradiction. You can't fight it and go, I'm this way. But we live in a world where they want you to say, do you like TV or do you dislike TV? TV's bad. Eliminate TV. Well, what if there's a show on TV of Jerry Mander telling you why to eliminate your TV? Are you going to watch that show? So there's a service and a disservice to everything we invent. So the one thing,
Socrates said he didn't believe in writing, and we only know that because Plato wrote it down.
Right. And see, when you said Marshall wasn't pro the machine, becoming the machine or becoming part of whatever you said, he said, if you don't study technology, you'll become a slave to it.
Yeah.
So he said he was promoting studying the hidden psychic effects of technology so that we can cope with what we don't like, and we can do like things like you brought up, imagine. So here's a couple other quickie things that you really evoked well. Donald Thiel, who's one of Marshall's best students, said Marshall teased people to believe that his percepts were concepts. So he teased people that I'm just out to help you or engage in new questions. I'm not trying to tell you the answer, but I operate in the book world and I operate in the academic world, and I'm supposed to tell people how to think and say, here's my theory. Like you said, in my book, I'm trying to, what was the verb you say? Advance this theory or say,
Yeah.
Marshall was not doing that, but his books appear to do that. And it's a fake out. He's like faking people out, but he still will go along. And the proof is in Woody Allen giving him a line in a nature motion picture. And check this out. Most people don't know this. Marshall's line was, do you mean my whole fallacy is wrong? That's a question. That's how Marshall would ask it, as a question. Woody made him say it as a statement.
I didn't remember the statement or the question, but they're standing in line in the movie theater, aren't they? Yeah.
they're standing in line, and he pulls up, but he pulls out the guy who's talking is like a professor like you or me. We know everything about media. I've studied media and society. I have 4 books from it, or and the guy goes, he goes, you don't know anything about it. I got Marshall right here. So when Woody made him say it as a statement, he exposed McLuhan to the world backwards.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
and so that we don't blame Woody, that's bad. We just say we revert back to another great McLuhan line. A half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So he basically exposed McLuhan. It caused Rian Johnson to become the great movie director he is, Knives Out and Star Wars, because of that scene. And he probably doesn't even know the line is backwards. It's not. McLuhan asked it as a question because McLuhan was about asking questions, but he appeared in this world. And so just sorry to go on this rant, but it's also when you said the dominant sense is that, neuroscientists come to our meetings and say, well, seeing sight is the dominant sense. But we know there's basically 5 senses. And when you invent spoken word, your ears become more dominant. When you invent printed word, your eyes become more dominant. So Marshall talked about what's called sense ratio shifting. The
Right.
senses,
Yeah.
you know all this. And so he learned this from 2 sources. And Marshall said, if you don't read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people and you don't study Mallarmé and the Symbolists, you're not going to get my stuff. So most of these people at the MEA, media ecology, they love Postman and they love Marshall, but they don't get Marshall that deep because they won't read Finnegan's Wake. And well, they will. They know about it, but it's hard. And it's like what Joyce did was he shifted sense ratio shifting. He shifted an eye experience reading a book to an ear experience. You have to look at the words and hear the words mispronunciated, as you're reading them. So that's the main thing that I think you can teach me is that through this, the 2 things are sense ratio shifting, and the other one's effects precede causes. And that's what he got from the Symbolists, where they got it from Edgar Allan Poe, which is reasoning backwards. He invented the detective novel because he really, spawned Mallarmé to say this: don't paint the thing itself, paint the effect it produces. So that's the effect precedes the cause. So basically, Joyce invented the internet and disguised it as a book. People think they're reading a book. They're not. That's like TikTok. We're doing Zooms when you're reading Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people. It's like that's what the effect of TikTok is. We're getting.
Well,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
A good friend of mine who passed away about 5 years ago at the age of 97, his name was Fritz Janschke.
Yeah.
He was a founding member of the Vienna School of Fantastic Realism.
Yeah.
Which started out after World War II when the Nazis had forbidden modern art. They all gathered around one teacher there, and they wanted to not only be modern, but the Kunsthistorisches Museum was open for the first time. They wanted all the stuff they saw there, the Bruegels and everything else. So they steeped themselves in technique and pictured realism fantastically. So they grew out of surrealism, but instead of puncturing reality, they're picturing it fantastically. Yeah. Anyway, 1951, Fritz Janschke came for what was supposed to be 1 year to Bryn Mawr College. He didn't really have English. Somebody saw his work and it reminded him of James Joyce. So he gave him a copy of Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses. And Janschke claimed to have learned English from reading Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses. Because he could take, and he spoke good English. Don't get me wrong here. He didn't speak Joycean, you know,
We call it Finneganese.
Finneganese, yeah. But what he said was he could take a phrase or a couple of phrases, and he would have 3 days of images going on.
Yeah.
And he spent much of his life returning repeatedly to Joyce's work.
Well, how do you
I'll have to
spell
send you some of the images that he.
how do you spell Fritz's last name?
Janschka.
And you actually met Fritz, or
I was friends with him, yeah, and his wife, yeah.
so have you read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people?
No, I haven't.
Have
I
you
did. I did go to a performance of a play on with a section of Ulysses. I think the dream sequence in it.
Yeah.
Done as a play. That was
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
But you
But
haven't
I have.
you haven't read Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake.
I read Ulysses years ago, and I tried Finnegan's Wake, and I did not get through it.
Right. And that's exactly,
Yeah.
Gene, this is it. You're supposed to say that. And then if you go, oh, did you read it out loud with a group of people? Because, Ray Bradbury wrote his great novel right down the street here in Venice, California. And I said to him once, so did you ever read Finnegan's Wake? He goes, I have it on my bookshelf. What do I do now? And I said, contemplate it. But it is. I would love for you to attend one of either. It's amazing what's happened on Zoom. Like I go to 3 or 4 Finnegan's Wake reading clubs on Zoom now, and it's an amazing. It's really way better on Zoom than it is in live person. But in a live, I did it for 25 years at a library here in Venice with people reading it aloud, and we just talk about it, and it's fun. But it is interesting.
The closest I've come to it. I didn't read it all the way through, but Fritz showed me he did. What do you call that? I'm blanking the term. The cards. The cards of
like fortune telling or astrology.
Yeah, the fortune telling cards.
Yeah.
What's the name of that?
Yeah, I know. I just did it for the first time in my life about 2 months ago. It's funny. You read your cards. Yeah. Tarot cards.
He did a tarot set of cards. I think it's 2 Finnegan's Wake.
Oh my God.
So it's, I think, 76 cards, 72 or 76 cards.
Yeah.
And Fritz had asked me if I could help him to find a publisher. And I wasn't really in the right place because it wasn't me, but I'm not an agent, and I was trying to get publishers. And then it's like is it more literary, or there's a whole publishing industry of tarot cards? And there's a whole tradition I didn't realize until I started looking at that of, literary tarot cards done to themes. But I'll send you a couple of images that he had sent me.
Yeah.
Of the tarot cards to Finnegan's Wake.
No, it's beautiful. And it is amazing how there's so much crossover, because in part 2, I definitely want to get into music, and just learning that Fritz learned English by reading Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses is amazing, because there are over 65 languages in Finnegan's Wake.
Oh, wow.
Now there's no way Joyce spoke 65 languages, but it doesn't mean he can't put references to the languages in his book. So it is like what Joyce did as a job. He taught people English. He was an English, or whatever it's called, Berlitz. He was a Berlitz guy, And so then you go, as soon as we figured out the word tarot card, then it reminded me of Frank Zappa's line in one of his songs, and he claimed Joyce as an influence in his first album. He says, he'll be terrified. So it's like Joyce taking the word tarot and terrified and putting it as one.
Yeah.
And then it made me want to think, how much this has been like a jazz or blues jam with you,
Yeah.
because you play music and we haven't gotten into music, but Frank had one of the best harmonica players. And I was curious if you've ever heard him, Craig Twister Stewart.
No, I haven't heard that name.
Anyways, it's pretty amazing. He's sort of like Frank called him the John Coltrane of harmonica.
Oh, wow. I did get to do some gigs with an all Zappa band.
Who was
which
that?
Was it was a group in South Bend maybe 15 years ago, and I'll send you a recording of one of the somebody taped one of the performances.
You mean it was a Zappa cover band?
Cover band, yeah.
What was their
that's
name?
what I meant.
Do you remember the name? Anyway,
I got to look it up here. I did, I think, 2 gigs with them.
There's one other quickie thing I wanted to ask you too, was studying semiotics. My friend studied it in Bloomington, Indiana.
Right, yeah. Thomas Sebiok had a whole program going there. They used to call it Sebiotics with him there.
How do you spell his last name?
Sebeok, I think.
Yeah, because my friend who's a great musician studied with him. His name is Dylan Buston. Do you know him?
No, I don't know him.
He's a foremost expert on Thoreau and Emerson. And he's in Boston now, but he went to Bloomington, and he's been one person who's taught me about semiotics, which I've never really studied. And I'm always curious about the origins and where it came from,
Yeah.
So that's what you really touched on a lot there.
Yeah.
So there's so many other ways we could go, but we probably could close out in the next 5-10 minutes and then hope for part 2 to cover all these other subjects.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really been a joy, Gene. How about this one? Because you did bring it up in a way. Is perception reality?
Perception is a means of inferring reality.
Yeah.
I don't see perception as reality unless you take a particular percept and ask the question, is this real or not?
Yeah.
But perception is an inferential process of taking in information. Peirce had an interesting view on perception as involving percepts. These are genuine, coming in from the outside, say optically or something like that, a percept. And simultaneously, as that enters and gets, received, it shades into perceptual judgment in the perceiving process itself. So as you perceive, there is something coming in that's not reducible to your subjective, view of it, but in the perceiving is also a perceptual judgment that you can't help but to make. So Peirce argued that I am already reasoning in my perception.
Right.
And of course, you can misperceive that way too.
You can misperceive too, because Lily Tomlin says reality's just a collective hunch. And so,
yeah.
Go ahead if you want to.
I take a Peirce's view that reality is what it is, regardless of what we think of it.
Yeah.
But he also made an argument, as we mentioned earlier, between the difference between existence and reality, that reality is of the nature of a habit or a sign. Reality is social and of the nature of a sign. It's what we would discover if we could inquire through an unlimited community of inquirers endlessly. The horizon of that end of inquiry would be a true interpretation of what reality is. That would be reality. So that you can see in his scientific context that um, is more understandable. It gets more difficult if you're talking about human affairs, where we can also create something that becomes a reality.
Yeah, well, this is very good because it seems what I heard there, I didn't grok it deeply, but I heard is he's saying sort of gestalt therapy wise that a major McLuhan thing was figure and ground.
Mhm.
And we say like form and content, but figure ground is environmental. It's the big picture. The figure is the palm tree. The ground is the sand, the ocean, the clouds, the people walking on the beach. The ground is more the big picture. So is Peirce saying that reality is more ground than figure?
He's saying that that picture you just described would be the reality, involving a figure in ground, maybe.
My
I,
my
I,
me trying to describe what ground is in that situation is the reality.
yeah, I don't see how I can't really put the figure ground distinction into
Into
his
what
view of
he's
reality. So if you want to ask, is a diamond hard? You do all kinds of testing to see the scratch level and all of that. And if you could, and you come up with an answer. But Peirce's philosophy of science involved the idea that all knowledge is fallible. Um, we have probable knowledge of an answer. We have a probable truth, but science cannot have any final
Oh yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
And it can't have any beliefs. It really only can have opinions, because an opinion is something that you leave open to further inquiry and potential self-correction.
Yeah, it's only a belief. The word belief has the word lie in the middle of
Yeah.
it. Okay, two more things and we're out of here. This is fun. And then the difference between percept and concept. How I said, Thiel saying, Marshall teased people to believe his percepts were concepts. Here's how I describe it. And I'm not saying I'm right. Percepts are intuition, instinct, emotion, and feeling based. Concepts are linear, logic based. Is that what Peirce would say, or your studies have led you to believe that's the distinction, or is it a different distinction?
Well, it might be a different distinction. Those qualities you ascribed to percepts would be probably what Peirce meant by perceptual judgment. All of those as not just what's coming in from the outside, but what we're giving to it. How we're coloring it in some ways. Oh, that's a chair. You know,
Yeah,
the information coming in can be it is what it is coming in, but it's even as it's being perceived, in the act of perceiving it, we're coloring it in these
wow.
different ways.
Oh,
And that's something that people who are good at camouflage can make use of. That we have stereotypes, schemas.
yeah,
So, oh, that's a rock over there, and what is this over here? So,
yeah,
um, if you want to hide, it might be better to hide under the rock, almost in plain sight there, because they're not going to think about it.
yeah,
Their vision's going to go to something else.
yeah. This is perfect again to describe. Marshall updated mid-career his main aphorisms. People don't know this. It's 1940, 1980, right in the 60s when he's on the cover of Newsweek. He goes, nope, it's no longer global village, it's global theater. So he
Oh, did he?
updated,
I never
well,
knew
he
that. Yeah.
updated it. And it was like the prosimian arch goes up around the world and it forms, we're all on a stage, Shakespeare, the world's a stage. And now it's YouTube and everybody's got their own personal podcast. Like we're doing live TV right now for the whole universe, for the world could watch this live TV. That's ridiculous. We didn't need a studio in New York with Elia Kazan and big bulky cameras and lights. So he updated that. The other one he updated was the medium is the message, or the medium is the massage.
Yeah.
Mid-career, he updated it to the user is the content. So that's what you said. This is it similar to what perception judgment is? What we give to it. So it's no longer the artist. It's not Finnegan's Wake is no longer James Joyce. It's what we read into it, or how we play with it, or how we deconstruct it, or whatever. So that's the user is the content. Is that term similar? Resonates with what you just said is what we give to it. Perceptual judgment?
Yeah, kind of like at a micro technical level, it would be that. But in a broader sense as well, it's not only that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is in the relationship of. I mean, if I'm using that metaphor, there's things in what Joyce wrote in that book that you can't change now.
Yeah.
But you can, when works of art live on into other generations, they can take on new meanings as well. Not that are not simply subjective from the new era, but that interaction between them, that relationship.
Well, that's the key word. That's the key word. When Marshall was asked, will there ever be silence? He says things don't exist on their own. They exist in relationship.
Yeah.
So that relationship word resonated.
I like when you mentioned user and content.
What we call it, figure ground or form in content.
But you said something. I said
the user is the content. That's the term. Yeah.
That's what some people have been making that kind of an argument for recently for marketing and for the way social media is not only marketing you a product, but your attention is part of the product. You, the user's attention becomes part of the product marketed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's simple. When I'm in a room and I'm talking with people about this, I go, can anyone hum or sing a commercial they grew up with on radio or TV? Nestle's makes the very best chocolate. Everybody, I know one. I go, tell me a poem that you can recite from when you were a kid. What? They don't,
Crest has been shown to be an effective decay-preventing dentifrice when used in a conscientiously applied program of oral hygiene and regular professional care. Now, I could have a sonnet where that thing is lodged. I wish,
Well, I can't wait until we get into lyric writing, poetry, harmonica, music, but that's going to be the next part. I really look forward to it. But let's end with this one, because this is a doozy. I never really get the meaning here, but you brought up the word consciousness. Okay. So this is a question Marshall asked. He didn't say this is a statement. So you got to keep it in mind. That's what he's doing. But he's basically saying, or the question wording is, and then I'm going to explain what I break it down, and then you respond. How about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? So he's sort of saying there's technology and there's art. So he's saying technology is collective unconscious. Art is collective unconsciousness. So let's drop the words or the word and why don't we just say, what's the difference between conscious and consciousness? And what's the difference between technology and art?
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that easily. Technology seems to me to be a means for living.
Yeah.
Art seems to me to be the bodying forth of living.
The what of forth?
The bodying forth of living.
The bodying. That's good. Bodying, like bodying forth of living.
Whereas technology is more a means for living.
Yeah.
You know, the paint and the paintbrush are the technology for the painting.
Yeah.
They're the means for realizing the painting.
Yeah.
But the painterliness, the artistry that goes into the painting is the art.
Yeah. No, now that's a good distinction. So now he said technologies are collective unconscious. Art is collective unconsciousness. So how are you you don't even have to try to rationale in terms of art and tech. What's the difference between conscious and consciousness?
I'm having trouble getting that link.
Because like a technology is
Conscious sounds like conscious sounds like the medium,
the medium.
and all that makes that up. Consciousness seems to be about the awareness of that. Is
The
that
awareness.
along the lines? I don't know if I'm understanding it correctly.
Because if technology is the medium, that's what you're saying. And he's saying technologies is the collective unconscious. We become our pen. It
Yeah.
extends, it extends our humanness. And so,
Or the opposite. You know, I mean, to me, that could also really speak to the problem, to technology as the unconscious, as the problem that
that's what he's saying. Yeah.
we have reduced ourselves to machine-centered views. We really think clock time is the actual way of time and not just one way of looking at time.
Yeah.
We really think that the brain is that mind is the brain and the brain is a computer.
Yeah.
And that's the problem for me, that it's a contracted aspect. You know, I think was it Buckminster Fuller said the universe is technology or something like that, or
Well,
is
here's what
technology?
McLuhan said, that technologies are our most human thing, that the most human thing we can do is extend ourselves, that this is how we extend ourselves. In fact, you touched on this, Gene, earlier. Jean Rouch, the French documentarian film theorist, said, when I put a camera between me and you, it's more true than without a camera. And we're like, no. Now, this is what I'm saying. We spent 2 hours together. I feel it was way more true than if we were in a room together, because our eyes would wander and we'd be more aware of all this other stuff. In this way, is only our heads. The only time you showed me part of your body was great, was to show me how the guy went over you like had to illustrate it by nobody gets up out of their Zooms. I really love to freak people out in Zooms by doing this. It's really simple.
Yeah,
like,
right.
hey, you can't do that in a Zoom.
Yeah, right.
And so that really helped. So, but if you say consciousness is awareness, then you're saying the artists they're showing us these hidden psychic effects. The artist,
again, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Technology. You said technology is our most human. In this, I can't really agree. I don't know if you're quoting Marshall McLuhan.
No, I am, but it's
to me, the qualities of empathy,
yeah,
of uh, you know, maternal instinct, courage, civility, decency. These, to me, are
Way
way
more.
more powerful expressions of what it means to be human. Václav Havel had a great essay called "The Power of the Powerless,"
Yeah.
and to me, these human qualities or virtues blow away any technology that we could come up
Totally.
with.
But
Yeah.
see, this is Marshall operating on what he learned from Finnegan's Wake. It's called Menippean satire.
Hmm.
You use the medium. I'm in the medium of saying important stuff because I'm a media philosopher. I'm going to say this. He's like poking fun when he says statements and trying to get you to do what you just did. I don't agree. He's like fucking with your shit. It's like Frank Zappa has this great line. He says, "Watch the Nazis run your town. Now, now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about somebody else."
Oh, nice.
I mean, he's
Yeah.
just like he's pointing the finger and he knows he's pointing at himself. He said, "I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure." You know, he didn't sell as much as all the other pure rock group guys, but it is what Marshall learned, this Menippean satire. It's like when Richard Pryor said justice. Yeah, just us. I'm here, I'm a justice. Or Lenny Bruce did it great too. He could, because I'll go back to Blake, who you quoted, I love. Lenny Bruce said, you can call cops. What? Your dad was a cop, right?
Yeah. Right.
You can call them three things: peace officers, cops, or pigs. Well, why don't you just call them peace officers? Because then you're manifesting what you want them to do. Why
Because
call
because unfortunately, all three are out there.
right? But again, what is it? Well, it's Mark Twain. When you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. We become, oh, I know what Blake said. We become what we behold.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why don't we promote? I don't like no to war, stop war. You're empowering war. Say nurture peace.
Yes.
I'm for empathy. I'm for compassion. But is that being too mamby-pamby in Pollyanna?
No, I believe that these soft virtues, I call them, are our greatest strength as
Yeah,
humans. And
yeah,
they're the ones that the machines that express themselves not only in technical equipment, but in the bureaucratic hierarchies that dominate, they are eviscerating
yeah,
this. They're eviscerating these soft qualities. They're making it harder, you know. And again, that's why I I'm very leery of what the place is for technology.
yeah,
It needs to be kept in its place, just as the rational part of our brains, by which we're called Homo sapiens, that needs to be kept in its place too, which is not to be maximized as we've done it in the modern world, but to be optimized
yeah,
by harnessing it to the other passions that include also these soft virtues.
yeah. Maximize, not optimize. No,
Optimize, not maximize. Yeah.
yeah. Optimize, not maximize. That's really good. Anyways, Gene, what amazing. Jumpin' Gene, that's from your athletics or your blues playing or both?
Both. It it
Whoa, that's a
it came
great.
back separately. I got called that for high jumping. At a certain point, I could touch a rim with my head.
Whoa.
And in 1972, I was tied for 52nd in the world in the high jump. But later, as I get into blues, and I was fortunate enough to play with a lot of the creators of Chicago's blues, it came back again. Somebody just said, "Hey, Jumpin' Gene." So I was like, "Okay, sure."
Whoa.
That was it.
So you more, we're gonna do it, but I have to get a tease. Are you more a Little Walter guy? What's the main blues guy you came out of?
There's Little
What?
Walter right there.
Yeah. But
There's a range, a whole community of harmonica players I really
you came out of,
admire.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into that next time. And
Sure.
Gene, it's been such a pleasure. Tell me the guy's name we've introduced us again.
Wally Rustin. Walter Rustin.
Wally.
Yeah.
Big kudos for Wally to introduce us. It's been
well, thank you for having me here for this. Having me here and there and wherever it is.
We're right here. Yeah. Okay. But Gene, it's really been enlightening and I so appreciate it. And I can't wait to send you an email so we can set up the next part 2 somewhere down the line.
That sounds great. I'll send you some of Janska's work.
Yeah.
They're not, because the stuff that's online is not really representative, I think, but I'll send you some things.
I look forward to it, Gene. Thank you so much. And even though I'm hitting this end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and it goes on forever and ever.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
To be alive, to be alive in the wonder of life.
Hello.
Hello, world.